I used to think my parents were ordinary people with ordinary flaws. Then they abandoned my grandmother at an airport so they could steal her farm. The crazy part was that they actually believed they were the smartest people in the family. My grandmother was 78 years old. She spoke softly, smiled at everyone, and occasionally asked people to repeat themselves. Because of that, my parents had convinced themselves she was becoming forgetful. "Mom barely remembers what day it is," my father would say. "She's not capable of managing that farm anymore," my mother would add. Meanwhile, Grandma would quietly sit at the kitchen table drinking tea while pretending not to hear them. Looking back, I should have realized she was letting them underestimate her. The whole disaster started when my parents announced they were taking Grandma on a vacation. "A little trip will do her good," Mom said. Grandma smiled. "That sounds lovely." A week later they drove her to the airport. According to their story, they were all supposed to fly together. What actually happened was much uglier. After checking in, my parents told Grandma they were going to handle a problem with the tickets. Then they walked away. And never came back. They got into their car, drove home, and immediately began contacting real estate agents. Their goal was simple. Sell Grandma's farm. Sell it fast. And pocket the money before she could stop them. At least, that was the brilliant plan they congratulated themselves for creating. I found out something was wrong that evening. My phone rang while I was making dinner. The caller ID showed Grandma. I answered immediately. "Hi, Grandma." "Hello, sweetheart." She sounded surprisingly cheerful. "Everything okay?" There was a brief pause. "Well, I'm sitting near gate 27, and everyone here seems very concerned about me." I nearly dropped my phone. "What do you mean you're sitting near gate 27? At the airport?" My stomach tightened. "Where are Mom and Dad?" Another pause. "That's actually what I was hoping you could tell me." I grabbed my keys instantly. "What happened?" "Oh, they said they'd be right back." "When?" "About 4 hours ago." I stared at the wall in disbelief. 4 hours. They had left her there for 4 hours. I expected panic or sadness in her voice. Instead, she sounded almost amused. By the time I reached the airport, half the terminal seemed to know her. Airport employees were bringing her coffee. A security officer was chatting with her. A woman from a nearby gift shop had apparently given her a magazine. Grandma looked less like an abandoned traveler and more like the guest of honor at a retirement party. When she saw me, she waved happily. "There you are." I sat beside her. "Grandma, are you okay?" "Oh, I'm fine." "You've been stranded here all day." She shrugged. "I've had worse Tuesdays." That response alone should have warned me something was coming. I drove her home and tried calling my parents. Neither answered. Late that night, they finally returned my call. Dad sounded irritated rather than concerned. "She's with you, right?" "Of course she's with me." "Why did you leave her at the airport?" His answer made my blood boil. "We had important business to handle." Important business. As if abandoning his own mother was a minor scheduling conflict. What I didn't know was that my parents had already started preparing paperwork connected to the farm. They were so focused on money that they never considered one important possibility. Maybe Grandma wasn't the confused old woman they imagined. Maybe she knew exactly what they were doing. The next morning, I visited her house expecting anger. Instead, I found her sitting on the porch, smiling as she watched the sunrise. "You seem awfully calm," I said. She chuckled softly. "Why wouldn't I be?" "Because Mom and Dad just betrayed you." She looked toward the distant fields stretching beyond the horizon. Then she gave me a smile I'd never seen before. A confident smile. The kind worn by someone holding all the cards. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "They're the ones who should be worried." And for the first time, I realized my parents might have made the biggest mistake of their lives. The following week was one of the strangest weeks of my life. My parents acted like they had already won. Every conversation revolved around what they planned to do with the money from Grandma's farm. Dad talked about buying a fishing boat. Mom spent hours browsing luxury furniture online. The farm hadn't even been sold yet, but they were already spending the profits in their minds. The problem was that reality refused to cooperate. Every day brought a new complication. Every phone call seemed to create another problem. And somehow, Grandma remained completely relaxed. One afternoon I stopped by her house and found her laughing at something on her phone. "What is so funny?" I asked. She smiled. "Your parents." That was all she said. A few minutes later her phone rang. The caller was a man named Jack. I recognized the name immediately because she'd mentioned him several times during the week. Apparently, while stranded at the airport, she'd become friends with a retired airline pilot. At first I assumed they were simply passing the time together. Then I noticed Grandma fixing her hair before answering his calls. That was my first clue. "Hello, handsome," she said as she picked up. I nearly choked on my coffee. "Handsome?" Grandma spent the next 15 minutes laughing and joking with him. When she ended the call, she looked happier than I'd seen her in years. "Jack seems nice," I said carefully. "He is." The smile on her face told me everything. Being abandoned at an airport was somehow turning into a romance. Only Grandma could manage that. Meanwhile, my parents' dream of stealing the farm was beginning to unravel. Their first shock came when they discovered the farm wasn't just a farm anymore. Years earlier, Grandma had quietly transformed the operation into a premium cattle breeding business. Not ordinary cattle. Elite breeding stock. The kind that ranchers traveled across multiple states to purchase. Animals worth far more than my parents had imagined. The second shock was even worse. The farm wasn't the only property she owned. As records began surfacing, more land appeared. Then more. And more. Fields neighboring her original property. Additional grazing land. Storage facilities. Investment properties. My parents reacted the way cartoon characters react when they step on a rake. Every new discovery smacked them directly in the face. "This can't be right," Dad kept repeating. Unfortunately for him, it was right. Very right. The funniest part was learning how Grandma had acquired everything. Whenever neighboring farmers wanted to retire, she quietly purchased their land. Whenever opportunities appeared, she invested. She never bragged about it. Never mentioned it. Never sought attention. While everyone else saw a sweet elderly woman feeding chickens and baking pies, she was building a business empire. The more documents we uncovered, the more ridiculous my parents looked. Lawyers they contacted became increasingly nervous. One attorney reviewed the paperwork and immediately refused involvement. Another spent 20 minutes explaining why attempting to sell property they didn't own was a terrible idea. A third reportedly laughed. Actually laughed. Yet somehow my parents remained convinced they could still win. Their confidence became a running joke. Every evening Dad announced he had a new plan. Every morning that plan collapsed. Grandma, meanwhile, was enjoying life. Jack frequently visited. Sometimes they went out for lunch. Sometimes they spent hours talking on her porch. One evening I watched them sitting together, as the sun disappeared beyond the fields. They weren't acting like teenagers. It was something quieter. More comfortable. Two people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. At one point Jack looked toward the cattle grazing in the distance. "You built all this yourself?" he asked. Grandma nodded. "Over many years." He smiled. "That's impressive." The compliment seemed simple, but I noticed how much it meant to her. Most people saw her age first. Jack saw her accomplishments. For the first time in years, someone was treating her like the remarkable woman she actually was. A few days later another batch of financial records surfaced. The numbers were staggering. My parents had assumed the farm was worth a decent amount of money. The truth was far bigger. Grandma wasn't merely comfortable. She was wealthy. Very wealthy. And every new document made one thing painfully clear. The people who thought she was confused didn't understand her at all. They had mistaken kindness for weakness. Patience for ignorance. Age for incompetence. Soon enough, a courtroom would give them a very expensive lesson. And judging by the growing pile of evidence, it was going to be a lesson they'd never forget. The court hearing arrived faster than anyone expected. My parents entered the courthouse wearing the kind of confidence usually reserved for people who have absolutely no idea they're about to walk into a wall. Dad carried himself like a victorious businessman. Mom looked as if she had already picked out curtains for a house she planned to buy with Grandma's money. Watching them was like watching two people celebrate before checking the scoreboard. Grandma arrived a few minutes later. She wasn't alone. Jack walked beside her, carrying a folder filled with documents. The retired airline pilot looked calm and professional, but the smile he gave Grandma every few minutes was impossible to miss. She smiled right back. Honestly, they looked happier than most newlyweds. As we entered the courtroom, I noticed something strange. Grandma wasn't nervous. Not even slightly. Meanwhile, my parents' attorney looked increasingly uncomfortable. That should have been a warning sign. The hearing began with my parents presenting their version of events. According to them, they were only trying to help an elderly woman manage property she supposedly couldn't handle herself. The judge listened patiently. Then he asked a simple question. "Do you have evidence supporting that claim?" The silence that followed was almost painful. Eventually, their attorney handed over a small collection of documents. The judge reviewed them briefly before setting them aside. Then Grandma's legal team stood. That was when the disaster truly began. First came the business records. Years of financial statements. Tax documents. Contracts. Purchase agreements. Profit reports. The stack seemed endless. The courtroom clerk had to make multiple trips just to carry everything. Dad's confident smile disappeared. Mom started shifting nervously in her chair. Then came testimony regarding the cattle operation. Experts explained how Grandma had developed one of the region's most respected breeding programs. The value of the livestock alone was significantly higher than my parents had estimated. I watched Dad's face slowly turn pale. The next witness was even worse for them. A property specialist presented maps showing every parcel of land Grandma owned. The original farm appeared first. Then neighboring acreage. Then additional properties. Then several more. The map kept expanding. At one point the judge actually raised an eyebrow. Even he seemed impressed. My mother leaned toward her attorney. "What is all this?" The attorney didn't answer immediately. Probably because he was busy realizing his clients were doomed. The humiliation continued. Witness after witness confirmed the same thing. Grandma personally managed negotiations. Grandma approved investments. Grandma made purchasing decisions. Grandma built the business. Far from being confused, she had spent decades making smart financial choices. The woman my parents described as incapable had quietly outperformed people half her age. Then things became even funnier. Evidence regarding the airport incident was introduced. Security footage showed my parents leaving. Phone records established timelines. Witness statements confirmed Grandma had been abandoned. The courtroom atmosphere changed instantly. Several spectators exchanged looks. One man in the back actually snorted with laughter when Dad attempted to explain the situation. "We weren't abandoning her," Dad insisted. The judge stared at him. "You left your mother at an airport for 4 hours. We intended to come back." The judge remained silent. That silence somehow felt worse than yelling. Mom tried her luck next. "We were acting in her best interests." Unfortunately, that statement was immediately followed by financial records showing their efforts to sell property they didn't own. Even I had to fight the urge to laugh. Every explanation somehow made them look guiltier. Every argument created another problem. Their lawyer eventually stopped making eye contact with anyone. By the end of the hearing, the confidence my parents had arrived with was completely gone. They looked exhausted. Defeated. Terrified. Grandma, meanwhile, looked refreshed. Jack whispered something to her that made her smile. For a moment they seemed more interested in each other than the courtroom. I couldn't blame them. The outcome was becoming obvious. Finally, the evidence presentations ended. The courtroom grew quiet. The judge organized several documents on his desk. Everyone waited. My parents sat rigidly in their chairs. Grandma folded her hands calmly. Jack gave her an encouraging nod. The judge adjusted his glasses and reviewed his notes one final time. Then he looked directly at my parents. The silence became absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. After several long seconds, the judge cleared his throat and prepared to deliver a ruling that would change everything. The judge looked across the courtroom and folded his hands. For a few seconds, nobody made a sound. My parents sat frozen. Grandma looked perfectly relaxed. Then the judge finally spoke. After reviewing the evidence, this court finds that the property, business assets, livestock operations, and all related holdings belong solely to the defendant. A wave of relief crossed Grandma's face. Jack squeezed her hand gently. The judge continued. The evidence clearly demonstrates decades of successful management, financial responsibility, and business growth. He glanced directly at my parents. There is no evidence whatsoever suggesting that the defendant was incapable of managing her affairs. Dad's shoulders slumped. Mom looked like she wanted the floor to open and swallow her whole. Unfortunately for them, the judge wasn't finished. The court is also deeply concerned by the circumstances surrounding the airport incident. Several people in the gallery shifted in their seats. The abandonment of an elderly family member while attempting to pursue personal financial gain reflects extremely poor judgment. That statement hit harder than a hammer. Even better, it was completely true. Then came the final blow. My parents were ordered to cover substantial legal expenses resulting from their actions. Their attempted scheme had officially become one of the most expensive mistakes of their lives. The courtroom erupted into quiet conversations. A few spectators openly smiled. One elderly man actually gave Grandma a thumbs up. Meanwhile, Dad looked as if he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Mom simply stared at the table. For months they had dreamed about spending Grandma's money. Now they were spending their own. As everyone began leaving the courtroom, dozens of people stopped to congratulate Grandma. Lawyers shook her hand. Business owners complimented her accomplishments. Even court employees seemed impressed. For years she had been treated like a fragile old woman. Now everyone was learning the truth. She was the architect of a thriving business empire. Outside the courthouse, Jack wrapped an arm around her shoulders. I believe congratulations are in order. Grandma laughed. I suppose they are. Then she looked at me. You know what's funny? What? If your parents hadn't abandoned me at the airport, I never would have met him. Jack grinned. I was just thinking the same thing. Over the next few months, life changed dramatically. The story spread throughout the community. People couldn't stop talking about it. Everywhere my parents went, someone seemed to know what had happened. The tale became local legend. The couple who tried to steal Grandma's farm and ended up paying for her lawyers. No amount of explaining helped. The facts were simply too ridiculous. Grandma, on the other hand, was thriving. Business continued growing. Investments performed well. For the first time in decades, she decided to focus on herself instead of everyone else. Then she made another announcement. She was buying a luxury RV. When she told me, I nearly laughed. A luxury RV? Why not? She pointed toward Jack. We've got places to see. Jack nodded enthusiastically. National parks. Mountains. Beaches. The whole country. A few weeks later they drove away in a vehicle nicer than some apartments. Watching them leave was surprisingly emotional. They weren't running away from life. They were finally enjoying it. The woman my parents had considered helpless was beginning an entirely new chapter. And she looked happier than ever. Before they left, Grandma pulled me aside. You know what I learned from all this? I smiled. What? She looked toward the horizon where endless fields stretched beneath the afternoon sun. People spend too much time judging what they see. Then she chuckled. They see wrinkles and assume weakness. I nodded. Big mistake. The biggest. Months later, Postcards started arriving from every corner of the country. Pictures of mountains, lakes, deserts, tiny roadside diners. Every card included a joke from Grandma and a cheerful note from Jack. As for my parents, they eventually learned a lesson they should have known from the beginning. Greed makes people careless. Arrogance makes them blind. And underestimating someone simply because they're older can be a very expensive mistake. In the end, Grandma didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she was smart. She won because she worked hard. She won because she spent decades building something valuable, while others ignored what she was capable of. And the funniest part of the entire story? The best thing my parents ever did for Grandma was abandon her at that airport. It cost them a fortune. But it gave her a new life, a new adventure, and a new love story. If you ask Grandma today, she'll probably smile and tell you it was the best delayed flight she never took.